All right, we're back with Dr. Datis K answering questions that were submitted on Facebook and via email. I got a ton of questions. Dr. K, everybody always wants to pick your brain, of course. No pun intended. Okay. If fasting is good for people, please explain why it is best for people to eat within an hour of rising.
If fasting is good for I
guess the first question is fasting good for people?
Yeah. Well, fasting can be good for some people, but it can't be generalized for everybody. So there's some people that have significantly compromised adrenal function, blood sugar issues, that fasting will totally destroy their health, their function. So, but fasting is good for example, neurodegenerative changes. When people go into low caloric intake or go into fasting periods, that has an impact. Now, when you're asleep, your physiology changes. So when you're asleep, your metabolic rate, your circadian rhythms, everything is functioning differently than when you're awake. So for some people, when they have, especially if they have low blood sugar issues, when they arise, if they eat within that first hour, they tend to have an easier time stabilizing their blood sugar issues. But it's not to say that that generalization applies to everyone, so.
I mean, that's the bottom line. There's so much variability, and so many people are different. And right, yeah. If you have reactive hypoglycemia, you got to be really careful about fasting.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. What are some of the things that can be done to prevent further brain deterioration? Well, taking the course is one thing to be done.
Well, simply put, whatever is inflammatory is bad for your brain.
Yeah.
Whatever you notice makes you immediately lose your brain function. Whether you eat a certain food, you don't get enough sleep. I mean, it's pretty obvious what some of those things are.
Right. But common sense, often.
It's common sense. But sometimes you just really need to see it laid out for you and then have steps to actually implement them. And
right.
That's what we try to teach people.
Exactly. Okay. Next question. How can you get rid of anxiety and OCD from Hashimoto's? Yeah. Anxiety is a pretty common symptom, I find, with Hashimoto's.
So, I mean, to get technical, when you look at mechanisms like OCD and anxiety, you're looking at increased activation of the limbic regions of the brain. Those regions of the brain are either overactivated or those regions are not being inhibited. They're there. The brain that inhibits them is the basic ganglia indirect pathway. So without getting too technical, it depends on what the mechanisms are. For some people, you have to do a neurological approach to trying to increase activity in the areas that inhibit the brain. For the other people, you try to look at metabolic things. There's a large group of people that have Hashimoto's that have GAD antibodies. GAD is the enzyme that makes GABA. And GABA is the main neurochemical pathway to dampen anxiety and to dampen these regions of the brain that cause OCD.
Right, it's a calming neurotransmitter.
Right. Yeah. So if you have antibodies to the neurotransmitter enzyme that makes your neurotransmitter to calm things down, then you have to control it from an autoimmune perspective. But again, there's no general treatment just to say if you have Hashimoto's and OCD, this is what you do, because it's unique for different people, right?
Right. That's always the key. You have to find the mechanism. You have to find the root cause and the reason for that manifestation. Next question: how do you get rid of fatigue? I mean, often fatigue is brain-based with autoimmunity and Hashimoto's.
Right. So for me, when I am trying to look at what's happening with patients or teach practitioners how we think through a case, we ask the question, if they have fatigue as a complaint, the question we ask is there fatigue brain-based? Right. And fatigue that's brain-based means they get tired when they use their brain. So fatigue that's brain-based is, for example, when they read, they get tired. When they drive, they get tired. When they're on the computer, they get tired. That's different than, let's say, metabolic fatigue that just hits you all the time. Right. So a lot of times patients will say hey, they have chronic fatigue, they've supported their adrenal glands, they've taken all these nutrients to improve their energy, they've tried supporting their thyroid, they've checked all these things, but their energy doesn't change. And you actually ask them questions and you find out that their history is brain-based, that only happens when they use their brain. And the days where they don't have to use their brain, like the weekend where they can sleep in and get plenty of sleep and don't have to be on a computer or working, those are good days for them. And they're trying to look at their diet to see what's making the difference, but it's just sometimes it's the endurance of the brain. So as the brain starts to degenerate, the first thing you actually lose is your endurance. And when you lose your brain endurance, you think you have chronic fatigue, but the fatigue is very clear to understand what's coming from because it's dependent upon you exceeding your brain's endurance.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Sort of related question: can antibodies by themselves cause fatigue?
Well, antibodies by themselves, not typically don't cause fatigue, but it's very interesting when you talk about antibodies to the brain, because antibodies in general don't really destroy tissue, but antibodies for the brain are uniquely different. So antibodies for the brain and the immune system in the brain are a little bit different. So if you have antibody elevations to neurological tissue, they can cause brain inflammation, which can fatigue you. But antibodies themselves don't necessarily have a direct cause. Right?
Attack directly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they signal the attack more often. All right, next question. How important is knowing if you are Th1 or Th2 dominant in Hashimoto's?
It's really important to find out what things could be triggers for you. Not as important to know how to necessarily treat yourself, because that's one part of the big picture of treatment. So you have to look for potential plant compounds or nutrients or herbs that can flare up your condition. So for a lot of times, for a lot of people, once they find out that, hey, they could actually have an adverse reaction to grapeseed extract, or they can have this reaction to green tea, or they can have this reaction to echinacea, and they start to look for that and they see that pattern, we are able to help them remove a trigger that they may not know about. So this Th1, Th2 list is something we really want autoimmune people to look at least have that consciousness of looking for those things potentially inflaming them or triggering them, because the potential is there.
Right. And as you stated before, the inflammation is at the root of much of the problems with the brain and other aspects of autoimmunity.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. I know you feel that patients with Hashimoto's should be very wary of iodine.
Yes.
Yes, we've been through this. L.C. Labs makes a supplement because they feel it is important. I've heard you say that iodine testing is not reliable. How do we know if we should supplement naturally with kelp or not at all? I'd be curious to hear if there are differences between men and women, I guess, regarding iodine. So, I mean, I know how you feel about iodine, but do you want to talk briefly about that?
Well, let's just go over a couple things. Iodine deficiency. Yeah. Iodine is really critical for many metabolic steps. It's an essential nutrient.
Especially for the thyroid.
Yeah. And many people are iodine deficient, just like many people are magnesium deficient and manganese deficient and molybdenum deficient, Right. But just because we have a group of population of people that are deficient doesn't mean it's appropriate for people that have specific disease, right? So iodine triggers the production of TPO. That's the target protein for autoimmunity. There's lots of research that shows iodine flares it up. And all this talk about selenium counteracting this and counteract this from a different nutrient is made up. It literally is made up. It's not based on research. It's someone's theory. It's on the internet. People are referencing it. Right. And people are using research. Well, they found a study in China but China is selenium deficient. Well, guess what? Everywhere is selenium deficient. So that doesn't. So anyways, these poorly correlated things that are happening. At the end of the day, iodine could be very inflammatory for some autoimmune people. But this is what I think people don't understand. What's realistic in a clinical setting is that there's some people who take iodine and they actually do feel better. Right. But is that the right thing to do? So there's some variables we don't know, but we also do know of one common variable that we see. When a person has Hashimoto's takes iodine, they can actually promote their destruction of their tissue. And when they destroy their tissues break down that have thyroid hormones in them. So now they have a surge of thyroid hormones in their bloodstream.
Which could be why they feel better.
Which is why they feel better. And this is why, and we see on labs the antibody count that goes up. So here's my proposal. And I've said this now every chance people have asked the iodine question. Let's do a debate. Let's get the pro-iodine, anti-iodine. Let's all pull our papers. Yeah. Let's exchange them, and then let's have a debate. Yeah.
And let's come up with a way of doing it so that we can evaluate what's happening while we're doing it. Yeah, that's the other thing. People take it and they don't pay attention to how it's impacting them.
So here's the problem we have. We have all these people with opinions, but we have one side not willing to talk together and end the confusion. Yeah. So we're ready to talk. Just let's do it.
Let's do it. I like that idea. Okay. Great comment. Next question is actually about SIBO. This person says, I think the SIBO test the breath test is not reliable. How do you know if someone has SIBO or some other similar problem with similar symptoms? I mean, I think it sort of brings up an interesting connection, too, with the brain, because the brain and the gut are intimately involved.
Right. So as the brain degenerates and you have the degenerative process, what people may not understand is that the brain has most of its output to the brainstem. And the brainstem has your autonomic functions like your heart rate working on its own and digesting food and making enzymes and motility. So when the brain starts to degenerate, there's lack of activity to the vagus. And then the vagus also controls your valve control. So there's some people that have brain-based SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So as their brain degenerates, they can't fire it and have healthy integration of their vagus, so they can't control their valve between their small and large intestine. And then bacteria that should only be found in the large intestine moves into the small intestine, which is the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's not that they have a bacterial infection. It's that the bacteria that's in the large intestine has the ability to go into the small intestine because neurological valve control is impaired. So lots of progressed neurodegenerative individuals, people that have impacts of the brain for metabolic reasons over time, start to have accelerated neurodegeneration, they lose their valve control in their gut, and they get small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Now, the testing for it is you do a breath test to test for hydrogen and methane, which check for most of the species, most of the common species for SIBO, but it doesn't always check for all of them. So if you have adverse reactions to carbs and starches and sugars, that's one way to see if you have it. Or you can just do a trial of the FODMAP diet. The FODMAP diet gets rid of your bloating. It's pretty good clue that you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. A lot of people don't realize that the digestive tract also is another nervous system. You can have neurodegeneration of the enteric nervous system as well.
Yeah, exactly, and that's another thing too. Is chronic inflammation in the gut, whatever the cause is, chronic celiac, chronic inflammatory bowel disease, degenerates the gut it's as well as it degenerates the brain. And now they're showing research that the inflammatory reactions that build up in the gut and these things called Lewy bodies that promote Parkinson's start in the gut, and they actually move up the vagus nerve into the brainstem and into the brain.
Wow.
And that some of these things may originally originate from intestinal inflammation as the working theory of research. Yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah,
that's very interesting. Huh. This is sort of related to the iodine question. Is there a multi-mineral or multi-trace mineral without iodine that you would recommend?
I tend to not want to recommend any brand name supplements, but they're definitely out there.
Yeah. Could not having a gallbladder be at the root of insomnia, pain, anxiety? That's kind of a shit question.
Well, when you have your gallbladder removed, the cystic duct, which is the duct that is the place from your gallbladder going to your small intestine, starts to balloon out and becomes its own gallbladder. It's not as efficient. So I don't know of the direct cause between them. Certainly, there could be a timeline where a patient notices that, but I don't know what the direct cause could be.
Okay. Here's my question for Dr. K is to ask him the relationship of Hashis to celiac, gluten, and gluten intolerance. Also, what can you do if you have Hashis and some of the celiac, but not all of the celiac markers? You cannot eat gluten. That's what you could do.
If you have Hashimoto's, you just simply put, it's pretty overwhelming evidence you shouldn't be eating gluten, whether it's celiac or not.
Right, and that's what I say. It's like, whether I see it, it's like, what is the destructive potential of gluten? That's what you always have to think. Like, when you make a decision, that's what you have to weigh, risk versus benefit. And the destructive potential is just too great. And
it's at the point now where there's just research where they just remove Hashimoto's patients off gluten unrelated to celiac disease, and they see improvements in their function and symptoms. Right. You don't have to have celiac disease to be the person who has to go off gluten if you have Hashimoto's. If you have Hashimoto's, there's enough evidence to just be gluten-free.
Right. I think often, too, we also see how getting off of gluten really improves thyroid hormone function, even with replacement hormone. It starts to work a lot better.
And there's a few papers that have specifically published on that mechanism.
Yeah. Interesting. Is it possible to lose weight with Hashimoto's, and how? That's a loaded question.
Well, I think it's a common frustration for a lot of people. Yeah, and I think what's interesting now is there's the field of immunometabolism, where immunologists are coming to the table and trying to explain slow metabolism and weight loss, right? Because up to this point, it's always been about hormones. The reason you can't lose weight is because you have too much cortisol or too much insulin, or you don't have enough thyroid hormones. But what the trend is going into obesity research and metabolic research is that inflammation itself completely disrupts the ability to lose weight. Gut microbiome diversity completely disrupts your ability to lose weight. Things like intestinal permeability can promote mechanisms where you can't lose weight. So all these things are now coming into literature, and I think as time goes on, you're going to see all these new breakthroughs in weight loss, and it's all about inflammation, which is already happening, and less about hormones, right? So Hashis, it's all an inflammatory autoimmune game. That's the hardest part about it, and that's why it's so difficult for so many Hashimoto's patients to control their metabolism. They're playing this very uphill battle with their disease process.
Right. Right, and there's so many potential causes of inflammation too. They're not always obvious.
Right.
Like stress, like you know, other
Environmental triggers they may not even know
environmental triggers.
about. Yeah.
Right. Interesting question. Is the MTHFR and MTHFR mutations that are often found in Hashimoto's population, are those a factor in brain fog and brain degeneration?
Sure. So we know that people that MTHFR are people that have a gene uniqueness where they can't process methyl groups, which are typically found in things like B12, right? Folic acid.
Right.
Methyl is a one carbon transfer group. So people that have deficits in methylation transfer of one carbon groups tend to have more depression and neurodegeneration, all these symptoms. So it's like anything else. It's like you have layer over layer over layer. So if you have Hashimoto's and brain inflammation and maybe even brain autoimmunity as your second target site for Hashimoto's, and then you have a methylation impairment on top of that,
Right.
and then you're not eating foods that support methylation, you add to the potential cascade of brain degeneration.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Let's see. So this question I get relatively frequently. What if you've tried almost everything and it hasn't worked?
Welcome to the autoimmune disease world.
Exactly. Go back to the drawing board. It's always, you got to keep trying. You got to keep trying.
You got to keep trying. But this is actually how I used to teach practitioners. Like when someone comes in and they've done everything and nothing's helped, you can pretty much bet they have autoimmunity, and that's when you start digging for that. So autoimmunity is no joke. But here's the thing: sometimes the perception is where the problem is. So when a person has autoimmunity, sometimes they're just thinking that I'm either healthy, I'm either cured or not cured. And when you develop an autoimmune disease, that doesn't work because you have an uncurable condition. So the question really has to change to, am I in remission or am I in relapse? And how do I better go into remission? Exactly. So once some people have that understanding with an autoimmune response, then they don't feel so defeated and beat, and they kind of understand how these things are. Right. So my experience has been when people say nothing has helped, that's really not the key thing. Is nothing is cured it, because they're unfortunately suffering from an uncurable condition, which does exist in the world, and unfortunately autoimmunity is one of them. So they have to learn how to change their lifestyle and their mindset, and if they do that, they maybe have much more good days than bad days, right?
Exactly, and I think that's critical too. It's really about, first, right, are you moving in the direction of remission? Have you achieved remission? And then, do you maintain that remission? Like it's not, there's no destination here. It's an ongoing journey that constantly has to be recalibrated and reevaluated and reworked.
Absolutely. And even the people that do everything right and get into remission, they will still have flare-ups. Sometimes they have no idea why, because there's factors that they haven't identified, and that happens. Right. But the more people look into the causes of their flare-ups and understand them, and then that helps them keep into a state of remission longer. That's the key model.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let's take one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. What do you think of the EB, the Epstein-Barr connection to autoimmune? And if you agree that it is virus-related initiated, then what are the recommended solutions? A lot of people have this. I mean, in my patient population, Epstein-Barr is hugely, hugely common. I mean, and in the general population it is too. What are your thoughts on that? So
there's definitely viral models of autoimmunity. When people get a viral infection, they have an autoimmunity. And those viruses like Epstein-Barr, they outsmart the immune system. So we always have, once we get the infection with the virus, we have in our body, and then they're just waiting for opportunities to express themselves. So right. You don't have sleep and you have stress, and those things add up, then you can have the Epstein-Barr flare-up. So people that have viral-based Hashimoto's, they'll have Epstein-Barr flare-ups, and they'll get their Hashimoto's symptoms flared up as well. But the problem with Epstein-Barr is that everyone tends to blame something for it, and I don't think people understand that. From a laboratory perspective, if you check antibodies, 90% of the population is going to have positive Epstein-Barr antibodies, which just means they've been exposed. So you really need to do an Epstein-Barr viral panel where they look at viral capsid, viral antigen load, and then you can see if it's actually flared up or if it's just past exposure. Right. But it's not uncommon to see people go to practitioners and they check for Epstein-Barr and it shows positive with antibody. Now they think that's the cause, and it's really not, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the other thing. Ultimately, there's often multiple causes. Yeah. It goes back to, again, lifestyle and management and balance and creating supportive life for this condition.
Yeah. But for those that do have virus-induced antibodies, we actually find those are the ones when we really support their immune system, both the Th1 and Th2 sides, they actually tend to do better. But again, there's uniqueness for each individual, but that's just a common thing we see.
Right. Which is helping to fight the virus when it's activated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, awesome. Well, I think it's about all the time we have today. This has been fantastic. As always, Dr. K, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I learned so much every single time. I'm really, really appreciative you've taken the time to do this for us.
Thank you, Mark. Great job with all the stuff you're doing and reaching out to the community. I know a lot of people are really grateful for all the stuff you put out.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. And your course starts when? What's the date?
So our brain fog course starts April 11th, and you can register, but after registration closes, we won't teach it till who knows when, but you can still have access to the course. If you can't start right at April 11th, you can always log in and get the information.
Right. It's going to be a fantastic course, not something that you want to miss. So thanks again, my friend. We will talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.